it's kind of loud out there. Would you mind just shutting that door? Yeah, is it possible? Okay. So, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. And feel free to, have dinner, and we'll be speaking along the way. I want to keep this, interactive and formal as possible. I want to thank you all for attending tonight. The webinar, we attempted to connect so that others who weren't able to make it in person could at least listen in, but we're having internet issues. But Dr. Miskolsky from Holy Cross, he's going to be recording it, and then we'll send out the actual link via YouTube. So I apologize about that. So I'm Brijesh Mehta. I'm a neurointerventionalist at Memorial in Hollywood. And just kind of want to go around the room. I know we hopefully have representation from the Tri-Counties. So those folks from Palm Beach, can you just raise your arms? Who else? Yay. All right, perfect. And how about Broward? Awesome. Okay. And Miami-Dade? All right, excellent. So we have a very special evening planned. As you probably saw the agenda, we try to keep it, as strategic as possible based on how the coalition has evolved over the last 3-4 years. So we started in 2015 with the basic, premise that as the thrombectomy trials were shown scientifically to be very effective in improving the lives of stroke patients, we try to restructure the EMS landscape, not just in Broward, but across the Tri-Counties, as we learn more and more about what the shortcomings were in the stroke systems of care. And one of the main, issues that we encountered, or frustrations, is the lack of data transparency across stroke centers, comprehensive primary, and the sharing of data with EMS. So with EMS medical directors, proponents of stroke care, such as Dr. Katz at Memorial, Dr. Peter Antevi, who's actually a pediatric emergency room physician, and many others, we were able to gain some momentum in order to create this grassroots movement, this coalition, along with the consortium of the over 24 neurointerventionalists in the Tri-County area. So we've worked diligently through conference calls, collaboration with the University of Miami to create a robust mechanism through which data can be effectively shared from all of the stroke centers that are performing mechanical thrombectomy, treating patients with IVTPA, and conveying meaningful data to the paramedics that are bringing the patients to these respective hospitals. So tonight's agenda, the various topics that we have outlined, are going to start with our collaboration and overview with the University of Miami. So we have, and we're honored to have Dr. Ralph Sacco, Dr. Jose Romano, and Dr. Carolina Gutierrez from joining us tonight. And Dr. Sacco is the professor of neurology there and the chairman. He's the former president of the American Stroke Heart Association. Dr. Jose Romano is the director of the stroke division at and professor of neurology. And Dr. Gutierrez is the director of research for the Department of Neurology at So without further ado, I want to have Dr. Sacco come up, and what he's about to show you is hopefully, gonna encourage all of us to participate, if we're not already, in data collection in a systematic way and sharing openly with EMS. Thank you, Dr. Sacco.
So thank you very much. We're happy to be here. Traffic wasn't too bad. Jose Romano drives very fast on the fast track lane there, so it was great to come here and glad to see such an incredible turnout. You really are, I think, leading the way in I think it's a grassroots effort that I think we hope to take at least statewide to start, but even maybe further. And it really, when you think about the whole kind of stroke systems of care, this is a way to really connect the dots between pre-hospital, the hospital phase, and then hopefully even the post-hospital phase. So we're happy to be here as part of this. I think some of you have been to our meetings before. You know, our Florida Stroke Registry is now actually in year 7, almost year 8, going into soon. But I wanted to first give a little background of where we are, where we're going, and then spend a little bit more time specifically on the regional dashboards that we've set up, that the hospitals now have, that I don't think EMS has yet requested. But these dashboards exist now for a couple quarters, and the hospitals have them. So again, it takes a team. Dr. Romano is part of that team. Dr. Gutierrez is my right hand in terms of really helping make this registry go. But there are many other members. You know, making sense of the data is not easy. Get with the guidelines, obviously, is the backbone of which our registry is built on for the American Heart Association. But then we have a number of programmers, statisticians, and others that kind of work in the data to kind of be able to create these customized reports. These reports IQVIA can't create, and that actually causes some of the problems when the hospital try to verify things, because these are kind of customized reports by region, by county, by state. So we've been working as a collaboration. As you know, also, we were funded by the NIH the first 5 years. And then the state, with the legislation change, took it over and is providing money. But each year, we have to ask. New congressperson, new governor, you have to ask for the appropriation to run the registry. And without the money, you know, obviously you can't run the registry. And so again, you know, it's a real collaboration, but it does depend on some of the appropriations. It's also a team effort, and as you know, there are many members even in this room. Niels, Burgess, name a few, are key members, but I think Miami, Broward, Palm Beach County are well represented in the leadership of this registry in terms of our Stroke Advisory Committee. And we also have Ken Shepke, that we're happy to hear is now has a statewide role for Florida and in the EMS, and he attended our meeting in Florida, in Miami, in not too long ago, and we're excited that he's interested in seeing the registry go further. So this just gives you a handle on the model that we're talking about. So at the top of the model is data. You know, M-STARS, for example, is pre-hospital data that we were able to import into the registry. But I've learned about some other new initiatives even where electronically you can connect EMS data to Epic data to get with the guidelines data. Get with the guidelines data is really the backbone. All of the hospital-based data on stroke, all the performance metrics that you know about for Joint Commission certification of both primary and comprehensive stroke center. And then post-hospital is the hardest. What we really want to know is how patients are doing 3 months out at least. And that has still been a gap for us. Way back when, 7 years ago, when we're trying to get everybody to collect 90-day outcome data, it's hard. It's costly, it's time-consuming, not everybody does it. That's still a gap in terms of getting post-hospital data. What we have done for now, and I'm not going to show you any of this data, we have electronically connected with Medicare data sets, CMS data, but that's only some of the patients. They're over 65 and they're only the Medicare sample, but we've been able to look at longer-term outcomes when we connect with the CMS. So the data is critical, and then when the data feeds into the registry, the idea is that we can track and analyze, benchmark, and look for improvement over time, and we can develop, demonstrate, and disseminate best practices. And the goal is to learn from the data, to improve care, and improve quality. So right now, our impact is on the healthcare system. All of us as healthcare providers, whether we're on the pre-hospital or in the hospital phase, we're really affecting the healthcare system. But there are others, and then this is our famous quality improvement loop that I've stolen from Get With The Guidelines. But the whole idea is, you know, you measure You benchmark your data, you compare to others, and you do things to improve, and then you remeasure, and you see this quality improvement loop that's improving. And then in the future, we hopefully to expand really on the multiple determinants of health, which include the community, the individual, the patient, the caregiver, and even the healthcare policy, payer, and standards. So this is sort of the model, what's called a conceptual framework of what a quality improvement program is all about. Now, I think you all know about the change in the state legislation that now brought the Florida Stroke Registry into the legislation, and it reads that each acute stroke ready center, primary stroke center, comprehensive stroke center shall regularly report to the statewide stroke registry information specified by the department, including nationally recognized stroke performance. So that is written into legislation. But as you can see, nobody's enforcing it yet. But I think the Department of Health does want to start enforcing it. We'll go over it in a minute and how we're doing. But this really says every stroke center should be collecting the data and entering the registry. At the moment, we have 82 hospitals of about 140 in the state of Florida. So we're getting there, but not everybody is in yet. But what happened was after we had this 5 years of funding, we demonstrated we could do it. We got all the kinks worked out with the NIH money, which was close to about $700,000 annually. Then we got the state legislation in 2017, but it was disconnected to money. First year we got $200,000, which wasn't enough to run this registry based on all the people and the work and the effort. And then the second year now we got $500,000, and then we're going to be going back in to ask, hopefully, and last year we asked for $1 million to really run the registry and to create all of these specific dashboards that we'll see in a moment. So right now we're at about 82 hospitals in the registry. So in the registry, 82, to be in the registry, you have to be in with the guidelines, that's the database we currently use. And then we have, regional representation. 33 in the south, you can see East Central, West Central, the North, and the Panhandle. Right now is fewer. So what the Department of Health wants us to do is get all the hospitals in. So in yellow are the ones that are the easiest for us to get. Those are all the ones that already are collecting and get with the guidelines, but haven't yet signed the contract to allow their data to be merged into the Florida Stroke Registry. There's about 48. We're going after them first. Obviously, nobody has enforced the legislation which says everybody's supposed to be in, but the 48 that are, quote, collecting and get with the guidelines, they're engaged. It will be easy, simple to get them in. And once they get in, all their data back to 2010 goes into the registry. The red is the hardest. That's about 30 hospitals that we estimate that are not in get with the guidelines, could be collecting data in various forms, but it would be harder to get that data into our registry. Now, we haven't yet said we can take data from anything, an Excel spreadsheet, somebody using their own data, homegrown database. If the state gave us the money, I guess we could do that, but in the legislation, it says using a nationally certified state or a nationally certified data collection instrument, and that was get with the guidelines. So the goal is in this year, working with the Department of Health, is one, to get the yellow hospitals in, and two, working with the AHA, to get these 30 hospitals aboard and then in. So right now, in your 3 counties, we have good, and this may not be totally up to date, so if there's an error here, let us know. It's a moving target constantly, like Baptist just bought this hospital, they're coming in this way. So right now, in Palm Beach, we have 8 of the 12 are in. The ones in blue, we have a comprehensive, the other ones are primary, and so I'll show you in a moment the ones that we think aren't in the registry. In Broward, it's 10 of 14, and in Miami-Dade, it's 10 of 16 that are in our registry in Get the Guidelines, but there could be errors. So right now, this is what we have. This was like hot off the press, but things do change any minute. Somebody say, oh, I signed on the contract, but the contract didn't come to us yet, or to IQB, and therefore we don't have the data. So in Broward, Plantation General, Northwest Medical, University Hospital, Palm Beach, you can see Bethesda, I think are coming in with the Baptist relationship. But this is what we have for now, and I know that this is changing. And then Westchester, at the moment, we have is not in the guidelines, is that right? Yeah. And then Broward Health Imperial Point.
They're coming off.
They're coming off. So it's a constant moving target. But I think what you see is that in Broward and Palm Beach, you have good participation in the registry. So I think that was the perfect setting for them trying to create these regional dashboards that we're going to talk more about. So this is the flow of data. Data comes in from the Get With The Guidelines, from IQVIA to us, and then we have to do a lot of work. The data is not easy, believe me. Anybody who's worked with it, it's tricky data, especially when you start merging with other data sets and trying to create these other reports. So it gets into the registry database. We download right now 4 times a year. We actually did promise when we set this up that the hospitals would be de-identified. We tell the hospitals the data, but at the moment it's A, B, C, and you'll see in our regional dashboards how we're dealing with that to give you the information you need, but still to for now protect the identity of the hospitals. That could change. You know, in this era of transparency, things could change. Department of Health, Shepke even has his feelings about how this should look. It's possible that the days of de-identification or blinding the hospitals may be in the past, but right now, that's what it is. And then there are 3 reports. The regional dashboards I'm going to go over in detail. The stroke annual dashboard is something we did for I think only the first time last year, right? Second time we're going to do it this year. And the state asked us to put together a dashboard for the whole state. And that's online, you can see it, and the Department of Health wanted that. And then what we started with were the individual hospital dashboards. Every hospital gets annually a dashboard that displays their activity by race and by sex. And compares them to other hospitals, mainly usually in the region or the state. And then we connect them up with hopefully educational programs to improve. So we've also published, and some of you have been part of these publications that have come out of the registry, on race-ethnic disparities, sex disparities, disparities in trends to door to needle time, predictors of thrombolysis for mild stroke, and the need to prioritize education of the public, and there are a number of other presentations. We even have some of our coordinators who've done a great job, who will put in abstracts that they're working on for some of the meetings like International Stroke Conference, American County Neurology, and the quality meeting. Amy has something here that she just put in and is hopefully to be accepted on depression and stroke. So we want to make sure that people realize that this is a resource that you can utilize. So first was the annual hospital disparities dashboard. I think everyone knows about these, I hope. Does anybody not know about our hospital disparity dashboard? Good. Okay. Well, every hospital gets a dashboard and gets to see their data, and really the curves, the graphs we show the hospital's performance versus the performance at the state level and at the region level. And we do white, African American, and Hispanics, and we do men and women. A lot of all the primary stroke data, all the performance metrics, and more are part of these hospital dashboards. This is the annual dashboard, and all of you who can get in to the password-protected website where you can download your own dashboards, as well as see the annual hospital, annual state dashboards available from you. You see, right? And this just shows everything across all of the metrics combined. So you're not seeing by individual hospital, you're seeing all the combined outcomes for the whole state. And then the regional dashboards. And that was the experiment, the pilot that we started with all of your great work in Broward and Palm Beach. And I think, like I said, you're really setting a standard. So the goal of the regional dashboards are really to, I think, take regional stroke care to the next level. To really, instead of looking at something that's totally statewide or just hospital specific, to work as a community, particularly as a county. So to improve quality of care through a self-monitoring tool that displays critical county-specific acute stroke treatment metrics. The grassroots effort really started by your work, and I think Rajesh and his team here really pushed the envelope and said we want this to happen, and kind of pushed it, and then we were the kind of the data drivers, but it was your hard work to get the hospitals all willing and able to be part of this. And then in May of 2018, we notified the hospitals. And this was the letter that went out to all the hospitals so they could download their regional data for, this would have been, which quarter in 2017?
Well, this would have been the notification that we're about to do this.
Right. And so they see quarter data. And I still think we have work to do here because a quarter is still small numbers. And you know, little change in small numbers in the denominator, the numerator can make the hospital look bad or good. So, but for now it's quarter, but we have some proposals to maybe make the data set larger and still give perhaps interim reports, but really think about it as an annual basis. But for now we do quarter, and each hospital has received a quarter regional dashboard in Broward and Palm Beach for certain quarters in 2017. Quarter 3 and quarter 4. Yeah, here it is. Quarter 3 and quarter 4 have been downloaded, have been cleaned. The hospitals have looked at them. They've written us a lot of questions back. In fact, we created a whole user manual so they could kind of replicate or validate the numbers. Some are easier to validate than others. The programming gets tricky, but we created this whole manual that we give to the hospitals so they can individually go in and hopefully recreate the data and be convinced that this is their data for the hospital. So they have had this, they've had 2 quarters now, and we're working on giving them 2018, quarter 1, quarter 2. There was a little glitch with IQVIA. We're hoping to get the glitch fixed soon, and then we'll be able to get quarter 1 and quarter 2 out them very soon. So they'll have really 4 quarters of data that EMS providers can begin to request. So here are the key elements, and again, your team were the key people that said what they wanted in the dashboard. So first, we wanted to make sure we included primary stroke center metrics. Everybody is still primary stroke center, so there's some IB TPA metrics in there. I'll show you a couple of them. Percent IB TPA overall, median door to needle time, modified Rankin at discharge, and symptomatic infrastructural hemorrhage. And then a lot of it was the EVT performance metrics, endovascular thrombectomy. So percent EVT arriving in 24 hours, 6 hours, median door to groin time, across all these different subgroups, MRS 0 to 2. We can actually collapse these down even further. As things got better, remember when this started, first it was 6 hours, now it's gone to 24 hours. So I think we could probably collapse some of these tables and not have as many subtables in here. So this is what it looks like. This is a graphic for Broward, and this is IB-TPA. So the denominator here is all ischemic stroke patients, regardless of when they arrive, all coming in, and the numerator is everybody getting IB-TPA. And so this is a percentage. The color bars are green is a larger hospital. Green is defined as large, 88 or more stroke admissions, ischemic stroke admissions in that quarter. Blue is medium size, and for now that's 43 to 87. And then red is a smaller hospital, less than 42 strokes over a quarter. So first you can see small, medium, and large. And then the gray bars are the performance, and I know you can't all see this from where you're sitting, are the performance in Broward County, and Palm Beach County, and overall for the state of Florida. So in the state of Florida right now, TPA use is 14% overall for all ischemic strokes. In Broward County, it's 18%, and in Palm Beach County, it's 21%, based on the centers that are in here. And then you can see the differences. And look so if you look among the green hospitals, there is some variation in terms of the amount of IB-TPA utilization. Now, Rajesh brought up a great point this morning when he was looking at this and said, well, some people sample versus putting everybody in. The majority we actually ran quickly a quick survey, and we've determined it's only about 20% of hospitals that are sampling in Broward and Palm Beach County. So that's about 2 out of 10, maybe 3 out of 10. The ones that are sampling are using the joint commissioning model of sampling, which is true sampling, we're being told. But sampling could sometimes how would you say, rig the data a little bit. If you only sample certain cases, well, we're only going to sample the EBT cases or the IBTP cases to look like 100%. So we have to be careful. I really believe the best way is to put everybody in. And the majority are putting everybody in. Even if you only collect a little bit of data on all of them, but you collect a lot of good data on the treated rates for IBTPA and EBT. But so the point first is to notice variation in care, and notice that the hospitals are blinded. A, B, C to J. Those are individual hospitals in Broward County. And the N here, the little number in parentheses, is the total number. So let's say hospital B is treating 3% of 30. Hospital G is treating 27% of 97 in that quarter with IBTPA. So this is just to orient you to your hospital's data for IBTPA. This is now median door to needle time. So again, it's dissecting only the IBTPA treated patients. So you don't get in this unless you got IBTPA, and then the median door to needle time for that hospital. The other thing we added in this was the average age. So, some hospitals are treating older patients. So for example, Hospital I, the average age is 65, while Hospital C up there, the average age is 61. So remember, age is something that will affect the outcome and could affect the morbidity and mortality for the hospitals. But this gives you a handle. Again, the thing to note is that there is some variation. Now, obviously, if we add confidence intervals, there's going to be some variation that's acceptable. And when there's extra variation, how can we get all to higher numbers? Or, well, for this median door needle time, we want lower numbers. And then this is percent EBT. So this is the one the interventionalists want to see. So this is endovascular therapy among all those ischemic strokes arriving within 24 hours in a hospital. So first, in the whole state of Florida, it's 9%. And this is, now remember, this is this is quarter 1, 2018. This is not too long ago data, about a year ago. 9% in Florida, Palm Beach was 12%, and Broward was 14%. Total EBT use among all these ischemic stroke cases arriving within 24 hours. Now, to the right there, by the way, is how we calculate things, and we let the hospitals know. That's in our manual, so they can recreate data, and you can see what we exclude and what we include. So let's look at the green hospitals for now. They're the larger hospitals. And we have one hospital, G, that's treating 26% of 97 patients treated with EBT. Pretty high number. And then there's two hospitals, I and J, 10% of 121, 11% of 93 being treated with EBT within 24 hours. So it's a little bit of a dashboard, just to get a sense of how the hospital is doing in that. There clearly could be differences. Maybe one hospital is getting patients later than 24 hours, or there are other reasons of people that are excluded from EBT for whatever reason, which there are possibilities, but this just gives you what the data looks like. And then this is now, if we change the denominator to 6 hours, which I think Rajesh, you had said we could probably delete this moving forward and stick to the 24 hours. You can see it's actually not that different. There's the 24 hours, and then there's the 6 hours. So we really aren't gaining that much, like subgrouping to 6 hours. And then this is median door to groin time among those receiving EBT. Like IBTPA, you only earn this if you got the therapy. Look at the green hospitals. Here among the green hospitals, large hospitals, the median times aren't bad, 63.5. 63, 54, and 70.5. But the 0.5 we'll have to get rid of. That's 70 minutes is pretty good enough. I don't think we need the 0.5s of these. But there's a median, and then the average ages in those hospitals. And then you can look at it in Florida overall, the median door to groin time is 72 minutes. In Palm Beach, it's 51 minutes. And in Broward, it's 63 minutes. And this is for all those coming in within 24 hours. Well, you have to get EBT. So again, this shows you a little bit about by hospital, how they're performing, what proportion of the hospitals are doing X, Y, or Z. And this just gives you a little example. There are a lot more metrics. I'm not going to go through them all, but these are the key ones that we wanted to make sure that you saw and the hospitals are seeing, and that we hope the EMS directors can see. So this is the hardest one, which is some outcomes. And this is your modified Rankin scale, 0 to 2 being good at discharge. Not at 30 days, not at 90 days, at discharge. And the first thing you see in the little box table below is we still have some missing data. So for example, Hospital D, which is a blue hospital, 28% of their strokes don't have the MRS at discharge filled out. In Broward, overall, it looks like 29% don't have MRS at discharge. So when we have missing data, it's hard for us to infer, and a few missing variables can make it harder. But this gives you the proportion that are hitting an MRS of 0 to 2. So look at the green hospitals and large hospitals. G, 16% are getting an MRS of 0 to 2 at discharge. Remember, that's a discharge. Many of us in the trial are really looking at 90-day outcomes, where the morbidity and mortality may even be less when you're looking at 90-day outcomes. And then you can see Hospital J, 40%, higher numbers, an MRS of 0 to 2 among those receiving EBT. We also have the NIH stroke scales in there in the table, so you can look at that hospital and say, well, maybe one hospital is only treating severe cases. So let's look at, for example, Hospital J, the baseline NIH stroke scale is 14 for Hospital 17 for Hospital J. The average age in Hospital J is 72, and they're still having 40% of their EBT cases in an MRS of 0 to 2 at discharge. So that's pretty good for that hospital. So this is what they look like. Let me pause there for a second. Any questions? I think the hospitals hopefully have gone in, downloaded, and seen it. If not, I urge you to go in and look.
I have one question. Of all these factors that you mentioned, for primary or endovascular, I think, and I want to know your opinion, the only things that can evaluate the system without considering the patient differences is time to needle or the primary and time to growing culture. Other than that, there are so many variables regarding the patient that you cannot really say, okay, this hospital is doing better because their modified ranking score that you measure it at 3 months are better. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think there are ways. So say you take 2 hospitals that are still seeing maybe similar numbers of cases, and one hospital is giving TPA to 20% of all those that come in within, the time window of, let's say, 24 hours, and another hospital is only giving 10%. When you see that kind of variability, it does call into question whether there are any other systematic differences between how things are done. How they, do they hang TPA in the emergency room? How do they get people quickly into a CT scan? How quickly can the interventionalists get in on time? And these are systematic things that we could modify in terms of the way we perform. So, I think some of these are still modifiable based on what's happening. Some of them you're right. If one hospital is only getting everybody over the age of 80, that may be tricky. But some of them are modifiable in terms of, I would say, performance and the methods that you do things. And then we also want to share best practices. If one hospital is doing really well, it's not secrets, but what are they doing that they can share with the other hospital, and then everybody raise the bar and improve care across the whole system.
My opinion is that the only real measure that could serve your purpose is door reperfusion. Everything else doesn't count. Everything else can be modified.
Is he an intervention?
Played with it. Yeah.
Bring that guy out of here. I have one thing. You have a 40-year-old, all the arches, everything is straightforward. You can go with one and one pass easy. Then you have an 80-year-old, arch is so difficult, you cannot easily get to the front. So it doesn't mean that you didn't do well on that one.
Well, that's why we put age in there. Look, for example, look at hospitals D, E, and F. The mean age in hospitals D is 68. Hospital E, 68. Hospital F is 65. You have to argue that the age at least distribution in those three hospitals is not that bad, not that different.
Age, they are not.
No, I know, I'm just saying, just throwing age out there. The NIH stroke skills, we will give you the variables that you can look at to maybe explain variation. And in our models that we do, we kind of create larger models for the whole system. We put other variables in to what we call adjust for some of these patient characteristics. Yes.
I think we have to sort of understand where this project came from. We started out with a sex and ethnic disparity project. We realized very quickly that in a high-performing tri-county area, sex and ethnic disparity actually didn't exist really. I mean, if anything, some minorities were treated more quickly than the main groups. And so what we really focused on was the zip code disparity. And what we're trying to do is just a transparency tool. This is not a punitive tool. It's a transparency tool because the pictures on both sides. For instance, if you treat only the top 3% of your optimal patients that make it into Dawn or into Extend IA or one of the perfusion selection trials, yes, you can get 100% good outcomes in 90 days, but that's not the point. You're undertreated. So if your treatment rate is low, but your good outcomes are very good, that sort of questions the good outcomes. Because if your treatment rates are 50%, but everybody goes to hospice afterwards, that means your selection's not right. In between, this tool gives everybody that looks at it all the pieces of information. It's not punitive. It's just for the EMS medical directors to take that information, get into a discussion, and for everybody to benchmark each other and say, well, hey, they're treating more. Why are we under-treating? Well, maybe we're a little bit conservative. Maybe we do need to treat those 90-year-olds. But if the 90-year-olds aren't good, it hits us at the modified ranking in 90 days. That every system finds their own balance in between. So that's how we lift the boat for everybody. I think this is an overall performance improvement tool, not a punitive tool. And I think that's what's so important to have all those measures in there and not really reduce it to one punitive measure.
Any other questions on the regional? So this is how we do it. So first, the hospital downloads, clean it, we developed it, they look at the graphs, we give it to them first. They see all the other hospitals, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then they know what they are. So they can see their comparison. So that's the first thing. They get it from the website. And then the question is, steps 5 to 7 are all the discretion and timeline of the hospitals, and then the question is the EMS medical directors. And for now, the way we set it up is the EMS medical directors are supposed to request the data from the hospital, and the hospital would give them the report, and then they would decide how to interpret and what to do with it. But that was the goal for now. You know, it's possible in the future we'll create things directly to EMS, but for now, that is the flow of information. We give it to the hospitals, they verify it, and the hospitals voluntarily give it at the direction, the request of the EMS directors. Now, has EMS requested any dashboards yet? Nobody has requested yet. Nobody?
I think some of us were unaware of it. I think some of us were unaware that that existed.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, I think didn't you say this is going to kick off? Was it 2018
Yeah,
or 2017?
as of this quarter. So
This quarter, yeah.
we allowed, the initial plan was go live in 2018, but out of all fairness to all the systems, because thrombectomy is still relatively new on the horizon, we wanted enough time to, allow for internal process improvement. As Neil said, it's not punitive,
Right.
so let's understand our data. That's what 2018 was for, the series of lectures that we did. And now in 2019, we do want EMS to be aware, and that's why you're all invited here tonight. And so in conjunction with informing the hospitals, I also encourage the Tri-County neurointerventionalists to connect with your EMS councils on a quarterly basis. Visit them and inform them of the availability of the dashboards.
If you don't mind, just one more question. You say that it is not punitive, but at the same time, if you want to improve the system, as such it's a very complex matter. If you want to improve the system in different hospitals, it should be shared with the hospital and it should be limited to the hospital. The moment it is, I don't know how exposure of the data to the EMS, how is it going to improve the system? Why is otherwise exposed into the system itself,
So I think first, a hospital wants to see how they're performing compared to another hospital. That's important for them to understand.
That's true.
That's perfect. I think what EMS wants is to improve the care across the county. Remember, EMS are the ones that bring patients to the hospitals, and so I think they want some knowledge. And I don't want to say, I think it should be all carrots and not sticks, but how to then, well, what can we do to kind of make things better? And how can one hospital share with another hospital? So I agree, it's not punitive, but it is a way to kind of, I don't want to say checks and balances, but to be as transparent as we can so that we know and EMS feels good about the patients that they're transporting as rapidly as they can from the field to certain hospitals. And if anything, we want to be able to give the hospitals all the tools and the educational programs that we can develop and other hospitals can develop to get them to even perform better. The ultimate goal is everybody performing better.
I totally agree with you. That's what I said. Like, how is that exposure of this data to the EMS is going to improve the services?
I think
That's what I want to know.
it fits into what's called, I think, stroke systems of
So
care.
if I want to step in there, so the first thing that you have to do is you have to first understand where you are in the market. Because if you compare yourself to Florida, we all consistently win a trophy. But if you compare yourself to Broward County or Palm Beach County, you don't. So that's the first thing that we needed to do. We needed to create a regional benchmark. The next thing that is you have to be able to take this regional benchmark to your hospital administrator and say, we are under the average. We're not performing where we should be. I need this resource, I need that resource, I need to improve this process. And then at the end, your hospital administrator may say, nah. But if your EMS or medical director comes and says, you know what, I'm aware that you're underperforming and hospital B is performing better than you and you're almost equidistant, well, that puts some pressure on your hospital administrator to give you the resources so that every hospital improves. And we've seen it as we've developed the bypass. The numbers in the Tri-County area have improved dramatically. And when you look at the TPA numbers, the golden mean times are within a minute now of each other. 30 minutes, 20 minutes faster than the rest of Florida. And that is because we create transparency, because people have developed the resources and put money where it is.
And the other aspect of this is that in this value-based future, payers will be requesting this data as well. So better to do it ourselves and to have somebody else mandate.
Why don't we hear from an EMS
Yeah,
person?
and from a pre-hospital perspective, in the continuum of care, we want to be part of the conversation. We want to understand what's going on. We understand the outcomes. We understand what we can do better to help facilitate, improve the performance on all ends of the spectrum.
And it's sort of, to me, it's being part of a team. And as part of a team, you work together, you share the information. And the stroke systems of care are all about bringing EMS with hospital, with post-hospital, and rehab in the future together and looking at all this data. And that's saying, let's work together to improve things. So we're almost done here. We still have limitations. One big limitation is there are still delays. It takes a while. Get with the guidelines first of all. It takes 90 days until we can even go and get the data. It takes almost 90 days before they will get the data in, then we harvest it, then we have to clean it. So some things are delayed, and that is, it's not real time, and it always are delayed. We have some ideas that we want to talk to our advisory committee about in the future. We also have this manual that all the hospitals hopefully know. It's online, you can see how we calculate every single thing, and you can analyze all your data you want looking at the manual. Here have been some of the comments that we got back from hospitals. Again, they're worried sometimes when they can't run it. That's why we created the manual. And then lastly, where are we going? One, we need to continue to lobby for the appropriation, which we started already in 2019 with the stand for state funding. Two, we want to get every hospital to participate in Florida to meet with what the legislation says. Three, we want to take this model that you've started, continue to work with you to apply it here, and then begin to work in Ellis County and what's the other county? Hillsborough. They'll already expressed interest. We want to accelerate this. Ideally, it would be great to get to real time reporting. That's not possible just yet. And then working with the Florida Department of Health, they want to bring other data in. For example, they may know how many people have high blood pressure, socioeconomic status in a county. They may have outcome data, they have other data that they want to connect up with the Department of Health. And then we want to continue to develop partnerships to, if anything, enhance the quality of care. And that's what it's all about. And I want to end with just again saying thank you to all of you who have worked so hard. Kixie, Rajesh, Niels, Peter, Ken, without your dedication to pushing this, we wouldn't have gotten this far. And then obviously the AHA, Jeffrey, Kathy, and others. So thanks very much. Enjoy your dinner.
The registry also has information, I guess.
Yes. We have some data for what's called MSTAR, which is an EMS database, but it isn't linked. Because not everybody gets the one number and get the guidelines data set, we can't automatically link it. So we got hundreds of thousands of EMS data, and then we tried to link it to what we had to get with the guidelines data set. And we were only successful in linking, I want to say it was 22,000 records. It wasn't great. I don't remember that. Even though I now have 100,000 records or more in our data set, only 20% of them we get the MSTAR data linked. Ideally, if we have the one numbers and the EMS data, it's hard to get the guidelines data. We have even better EMS data. So that's another, to me, I think, gap area.
What more information is that data?
EMS, you guys collect this MSTAR data. There's about time from scene, call to scene to hospital. There's all these measures in there. They're experts more than I am. But we put a lot in there and we looked at some rates. I think as far as one of the papers we published use the MSR data.
Is that information so that information not yet available for us to review?
Carolina, the MSTAR's data is in, but it's not in any of your reports. Because we took it in and we merged it together, but we haven't translated it back to individual hospitals. The MSTAR's data, and it was only in a sample. It was only 20% of the whole sample, so that's still good. So I think on the pre-hospital phase and the post-hospital phase, we are still weak there, and we need to be stronger.
Thanks very much, Dr. Sacco, for an excellent presentation. Just to get a show of hands, you brought up a good question about the pre-hospital care and data collection. How many of you are using Pulsera or Randy, the health data exchange that Memorial is utilizing? Anyone using any electronic way to get data from EMS as part of the spectrum of care?
To get their run sheet electronically.
No, prior.
I see.
Oh, no, not prior.
Okay. Yeah, so, as Dr. Sacco said, hopefully that will be the future where services, software like the Health Data Exchange, and Dr. Katz has been working with their group, to integrate into our system. And if anybody is interested, please reach out to him. Randy, I don't know if you want to say a few words about that right now.
No, I mean the health data exchange, is sort of agnostic software that fits between the hospital EMR system and the EMS EPCR. So, essentially a software product that can connect the hospital to EMS, and with that, the run sheets populate into the EMR, and on the EMS side, there are data analytics available. It really depends on what software the hospital is using, what software the EMS agency is using, and there's a lot of fragmentation in those markets. So there's Cerner and Epic and all these different hospital software systems, and then on the EMS side, there's a whole bunch of fragmentation too. So when some of these software matches, so if the Health Data Exchange is ESO, and if the EPCR on the EMS side is ESO, it connects really nicely to any hospital system. But when you have three different softwares, it can definitely get a little complicated. And some of that interconnectivity, can get technically challenging. And some of the data analytics are limited depending on what software you're using. But it is there, and it's sort of in its infancy. But I think there are, down the road, a lot of potential for that type of thing. And it's basically a barcode. So the EMS agency brings the patient in, barcodes, connects everything on the EMS side of the hospital. And in Broward and South Broward, we've done that with the 6 or 7 agencies that work with our system.
Thanks, Randy. So I just want to, kind of reiterate because Ravi did ask an excellent question about, what is the utility of some of this data for EMS. I think maybe 15 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, probably safe to assume, and without offending anyone in the EMS circles, that they were viewed as a transport agency, right? So bring the patient and leave. But as we've noticed with trauma and STEMI and sepsis, it's more than just a transport agency. They really want to know what is happening to the patient after they bring them to the ER. And, part of calling in that stroke alert, performing whether you're doing the fast, ED evaluation or the rate scale, van, what have you, is to integrate them into your system of care. And it's more than just loyalty or appreciation. They're in this line of work, as I've learned over the last few years, because they care about these patients just as much as we do on the hospital side. And it will be starkly different, from a decision tree standpoint, if we, as any of your systems, if we were the only game in town, okay? And then assume, okay, from a monopoly standpoint, we don't really need to do anything. We know that EMS doesn't have a choice. They're going to bring the patient to us. But when we look at the map, and this is one of the first things I did when I came to South Florida, and look at the Tri-County, just as Neil says and many of our other colleagues, there are comprehensive stroke centers that are ATA tested almost at, every couple of blocks. And, I don't say that lightly. It's very true if you look at the map. And it was actually EMS, the medical directors, who approached us and says, how do we decide now where to take the patient? So it could be their family member, right? And so they really are invested in this just as much as we are from the standpoint of delivering the best care possible. So next I want to go into some of the feedback points.
Can I make one quick comment? I think that's also equally important. Like, you know this from your own experience. That is, we know that stroke care has moved into the EMS arena. Paramedic has now become extended neurologists and helping us make decisions on whether to mobilize a team. The problem is that the yield is very poor, and it's very expensive to mobilize a team and then stand it down when you find out there's nothing to do. So what we need to do in order to keep our healthcare costs in check for the future is we need to refine how we activate our team so we have a better activation to intervention ratio. And for that, we need that feedback. We need, for instance, aggregate, or we need discrete data for race scores or vans or whatever it may be, so we can see which is the marker that identifies when the patient really goes to the lab. And that's where we're still falling short right now, because we have a lot of hustle and bustle, but it's not necessarily cost effective. I think that's sort of the next phase of it.
Totally agree. And I want to just take the next 10-15 minutes to go over some of the critiques and constructive feedback for the dashboards, as we've discussed with Dr. Sacco, Dr. Gutierrez's team. So, from a sampling standpoint, extrapolating the treatment rates, the percentage of treatments for IVTPA or mechanical thrombectomy, I would strongly encourage all the stakeholders in the room here and whoever is going to, be in charge from a analyst standpoint at your hospitals to invest the resources to count every stroke diagnosis. Because if we don't do that, the hospitals that are combing through this data and including every diagnosis of ischemic stroke in the denominator, in some ways they're being placed at a disadvantage. So I'll just tell you from our own example, we cross-checked both Memorial Regional and Memorial West data for percentage of treatment rates and got starkly different numbers, okay? And this is why we wanted to introduce the dashboards to EMS only this year, because we realized that we were also sampling for a few of the quarters in 2017. So we encouraged them and we hired 2 more analysts and we started counting, now that we had the additional resources, every single patient, and the numbers match more closely with what the UN group has analyzed. And so it gives us a more realistic, more accurate picture for treatment rates, and also does not put other hospitals, at an unfair advantage or disadvantage. Does that make sense? And again, it's not about competing. We all want to benchmark ourselves with each other, and only if that data going into these, national registries is reliable, can we utilize it in a informative way. The median door to groin subset times, as Dr. Sacco mentioned, the data, what we would like to share with EMS is, put yourselves in from the standpoint of what EMS medical directors and the chiefs are going to be looking at, right? Even myself, we're not statisticians. We don't expect them to easily interpret this data in terms of transfer, non-transfer patients, what are the median times, cross-checked with median anti-stroke skill score and age and so forth, or outcomes. And so if we all agree as a group, and this is the goal of having that endovascular committee meetings that we have every couple of months, is to reach a consensus in terms of simplifying these dashboards, not to limit the data coming out to EMS, but to make it more meaningful and understandable. And what we started doing at Memorial starting this year is showing EMS a sample of these dashboards with just our hospitals unblinded, so they can see it and then ask us questions along the way. Okay, what does this mean in terms of what is even a 90-day MRS? We take all of those variables and factors for granted, and so as neurointerventionalists invested in this system, I think it's very important for us to set up these visits with the EMS agencies every quarter. So as these dashboards are shared, it's not just being emailed to them, but you're having a face-to-face conversation with them and explaining to them exactly what the data means. Because otherwise, all the hard work that's being put in is a wash, right? And I hope most of you and all of you will agree with me on that. It was, eye-opening for me going out to these stations and explaining the different components of the race scale. We take the NIH stroke skills, assessment for granted, simplifying it, and we think it's simple, but even for EMS, the interpretation of aphasia versus dysarthria is very confusing. And agnosia, just forget about it, okay? So while you're out there teaching them about these scales, take time to also explain what the different analyses of the dashboards mean, for workflow and outcomes. And finally, the 90-day MRS. So we've spent now about probably a good part of 2 years shoring up our completeness for discharge MRS and 90-day MRS. So that required training all the stroke unit nursing staff, getting them MRS certified through the online education tool as step number 1, and then making sure that our analysts are tracking which patients at what time frames need the 90-day MRS, and ideally calling them and confirming their clinic visit. If they cannot come to clinic, then doing the assessment by phone. Okay, so there's a lot of missing data, as you all saw, for 90-day MRS, discharge MRS, and then the symptomatic ICH rates. For symptomatic ICH, we formed a QI committee at Regional and West that basically on a monthly basis, in conjunction with our stroke steering committees, our stroke coordinators send us in advance the scans to review that had any form of hemorrhage after TPA or thrombectomy, and we go over it in a subcommittee and then mention our findings and conclusions at the steering meetings. It's not very time consuming as long as you do it in a systematic way, and that is whether it's weekly or monthly, whatever it is, so cases don't stack up. So, any questions about any of the dashboards? And this is not the end all in terms of what's been shown by Dr. Sacco. We would like to convene, on a regular basis as part of our endovascular committee, and the stroke coordinators are welcome to join in also, and tell us what your concerns are at your centers in terms of data collection.
Two quick comments. So the first issue is that when you're starting to treat patients with a modified ranking score of 2 or worse, you're going to see that reflected in your 90-day outcome. So I think the American Heart Association is working on a retroactive modified ranking score that you can sort of normalize that 90-day modified ranking score against. Because if you have a wheelchair-bound engineer like I had, he's a modified ranking of 3, but he drove himself home from the hospital after the embolectomy. That is a good outcome, even though he's still a modified ranking of 3. So those are the things that we need to take into account. And I think from a symptomatic hemorrhage rate, I think that's one of the measures I struggle with the most. Because if you're modified, if your NIH stroke scale goes up by 4 points, and you have any hemorrhage, no matter that it has nothing to do with patient deterioration, it automatically goes in as a symptomatic hemorrhage. And I think it's the most asinine thing that ever happened. And I don't know why we can't fix this, but for some reason that doesn't get through into the manual. So I don't know if you've seen that same issue.
And puncture. So if I
agree. We can't measure it by that standard, but we never get a CPA.
That's right.
But that's how you get to a 16-minute forward function. So the issue is, I don't know that that's a good measure.
No, I agree. It's not a good measure. It's the one we use,
We should
though.
measure. We should measure door to scout CT.
Right.
I agree.
And this is why I'm asking, because we know there's inherent variability. Because and Dr. Sacco, this might be something to take up at a state level, and because if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. And if there's variability among the different definitions, then it makes interpreting the data even more challenging.
I don't think at the moment any of that is in the database, right? No. Jeffrey Dorda picture or
No.
CTA or, that's where there are gaps. But
Right.
we have the ability, if people agree, to then add data to the Florida Stroke Registry. We can add a data item. We've done it in the past. If everybody agrees on what it should be, we can have these things added to the future.
So at our institution, we have just redefined picture to puncture as the start of the last image modality that took you to the lab. Some people require CPA alone, some people require CT perfusion, others nothing. So the last image that was obtained to a groin or wrist puncture, the skin puncture.
So one of the things that I think will be important to measure is also the workup that patients receive before going to thrombectomy with the thrombectomy patients. Because I know, talking to different interventionalists around South Florida, there's a big disparity. There are a lot of patients in some centers who are going to quote-unquote thrombectomy without actually a workup, without a confirmed arterial occlusion. They're going straight to IR, so that's something that would be good to capture, because obviously that's going to skew your times quite considerably. We see times in the dashboards that to me, at my institution, which I think were very, very fast, that are unfathomable, you know, like a 15-minute door-to-door puncture, how are you going to get a CPA and interpretation in that time? I mean, maybe if patient rolled in and you happen to be right there, but I'm just saying it would be good to make sure that patients are not being basically, you know, taken for thrombectomies way too much. You know, it's like that's without actually a confirmed.
I mean, I think Neil's gave a great example. Somebody with a big syndrome, high suspicion of a large vessel occlusion.
Hypertension 1, throw that in.
Or
I mean,
something.
like, what more do you need, man? Do I need to hit you with a stick?
I think that's the point. Remember time.
So that happens rarely, and of course we would take a patient like that, you know, and maybe but I'm just saying, I'm talking about a systematic,
So what we could do, in the
you don't want to
database,
exploit patients for.
we could look at all of those who are treated with EBT, and then look at what was the workup. I believe workup is in the database. CTAs, I'm looking at Jeffrey. CTAs, and then we could evaluate among those treated by hospital. You know, certain EBTs done, how many had prior CT only, MR only, CT perfusion, CTA, just look at the data. But I think you can make a case, like they do in parts, you know, to go quickly to the cath lab if indeed it sounds like a large vessel occlusion without the confirmatory radiographic evidence.
Easiest and fastest way to achieve a TP3 reperfusion is if the patient doesn't have a large vessel occlusion to start with. But we are not criminals.
You want to avoid unnecessary angiography, but I mean...
Lastly, if you have no TP3 on your first angiography run, I mean, you have to have an occlusion, you have to do something. You never know that anybody would code the TP3 and go into your first run. Like yesterday, I had a patient who had a CTA with a thrombus. I went to the lab, no CTA, the thrombus was gone. So what do? It's just I code it as a diagnostic angiogram. My puncture goes out the window, doesn't get counted. It's just what it is. But you know,
I just think that to get few surprises by things I'm hearing.
What way?
Like
I think in the end it goes down to what is
from no large vessel occlusion.
What is the fastest way to get the patient treated, and what is your 90-day modified rate?
Yeah. We can definitely have that conversation. So, but I agree. We do the same. We code it as a diagnostic angio if there's no LVO. So, another question for you all is, what is your definition of groin puncture? And we had a brief discussion about this at our last meeting, but we do want to have a consensus amongst all the neurointerventionalists and as what you are defining, because it's very tough to have a timestamp, you know, of puncture time. But at our last meeting, what we had proposed was we capture a fluoro snapshot immediately before, and I reiterate that immediately before. So whether that's 30 seconds or 1 minute, whatever it is, not 10 minutes before, immediately before skin contact for first attempt at groin puncture. So that means that, you know, just take a fluoro shot of the groin area, the Kelly, whatever you guys are using, that's what I use, and take a single shot, and now that's your timestamp. Immediately after that, you're attempting groin puncture. What do you guys think?
Okay, you say immediately before. You can swear. So now, what you can swear for is if you have a sheath in the groin and you take the picture of it. Why don't we do that? Because
that's not
that is given.
You may have a patient that may have some problem.
Right.
And then you may be struggling into having a sheath.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you didn't.
Me too and you too.
Yeah, doesn't mean that you did not.
And if you say that there are lots of 90 years old, yes, we have a lot of 90 years old.
So yes, having the sheathing doesn't mean that okay, you may have the sheathing.
Well, that's the proof. That's the proof that the sheath is in. For me, for you.
So first of all, we don't need the proof. We are all physicians and we wanted the data
Great. So for me, having a picture of a snapshot of fluoro or something, I think the best thing is the attestation of the physician telling somebody in the room, puncture time, this. That's it. That goes on the record.
So don't misunderstand. I already gave up on this, and we do the same thing. So whenever I puncture with the needle, the skin, that's the groin puncture. But it's not correct. I disagree. The correct is we have the groin when the sheet is in.
But I think it's a good measure of the system of care, because if somebody has a transvenous bypass and you struggle to get in there, it's not necessarily a measure of your system of care. But if you have somebody performing skin puncture with local anesthetic, which is what we really should all be doing, that means you have an interventionalist at the table ready to go. And I think that's an incorrect measure. And this is an honor system. We measure the TB score by honor system. We measure the 90-day modified ranking as an honor system. So to some extent, you know, my first, if you look at my engram, my first recorded image is a living map of the So I don't want to fluoro my radiologist, my anesthesiologist next to me just because of the documentation. I mean, I can, but I don't think I do.
Well, let's say, I just thought I would forget to.
And so I mainly bring this up as a topic for discussion within our endovascular committee, so that at least whatever definition we all agree with, there ought to be, you know, minimal variation, right? And so whether it's sheath in the artery, or first site of puncture of the artery, or, you know, skin contact and the snapshot right beforehand, I'm okay with whichever, and I think it's just, and I asked this to Dr. Noguera, you know, during our swing.
There's a guideline manual that says, it says skin puncture. And that's pretty clear. That means you have a needle that penetrates the skin, and that's the time. It's not when you put some X-ray tool on top of the skin and walk away and put your right gown on.
Yeah. I mean, even within the randomized trials, they did not have, looking back, a consensus on what was the agreed upon definition of puncture. And when I asked Raul, he said that, you know, the sites in Don had defined it differently. You know?
At the end of the day, the point is, when is the clock out? So this is why I'm saying you can play with numbers, because if you, let's say, you have a very difficult drawing, but from there, everything is straightforward. You can get that clock out pretty easy. You can cheat with the number, 5 minutes here, up, but then you are cheating against yourself when you are, when the point is when you get the blood clot out. And we, I think we do have that measure too, don't we? The groin to reperfusion, or don't we? Yeah. Groin to reperfusion. So when we add the door to groin and the groin to reperfusion, we arrive to a number which is actually the most important number. When is the clot out? And when we did in the middle of the groin puncture, it doesn't matter. When we did the first pass, it doesn't matter. Yeah, internal. So you can, you know what is the difference, what.
Yeah, so,
improve on what you have
right.
1 year.
So Laszlo, you're right in terms of, okay, time for reperfusion. Yes, absolutely critical. The understanding, and for others to get a gauge of quality of a systems level efficiency, where it's more than just the operator, that's why, you know, it's important to at least report out consistently with the definitions of what is drawer, what is puncture, and what that global metric is. And yes, as a follow-up, you know, secondary metric, puncture to reperfusion, can be reported. But I think when multiple team members from ER, radiology, neurology, even anesthesia are involved, we do want to understand how quickly is that patient getting onto the table, prepped, ready for you to start your procedure.
But on the other hand, when I want to convince the EMS medical chiefs that bring the patient to, let's say, hospital A and not hospital B, there the point is when the clot is out. you don't care how quickly the patient's growing. And actually, don't misunderstand me. I think we do a pretty good job in door-to-groin puncture. Maybe you know it better than I do, but that's not the point. The point is when the clot is out. Because that will determine how quickly the patient will recover.
Excuse me. This doesn't measure the system. This measures the patient variables. You want it for the EMS, they want to see how the system, like Amanda was saying, how the system works. How you can get to the patient, how you can arrange for the anesthesiologist to do. So the other things, they are so variable. All of us we know, as we said, the patient may be difficult to get to that. The clot might be so soft at the first time. Sometimes they are organized clot. So revascularization, I think, is very important for patient prognosis. That it does not measure the system how the system works. But I agree with you, it's very important for long-term prognosis of the patient. That doesn't, there are so many variables that we cannot measure the system by talking about.
I think what we need to look back at is where we came from. 3 years ago, in Palm Beach, I had a discussion with one of the stroke directors of a hospital system, and he said that the stroke organization was not in the business of associating assessing quality of care. That was not what we would do. We should do outreach and this and that, but we should not assess quality of care. What does this word come from? Actually, Rajesh had to completely create a new stroke organization and ditch the other one because the other one wasn't stepping up to the point. And we had to push some of our national organizations and create our own little dashboards to really get to the metrics that we want to get to. So what you're talking about, I think, is interesting and needs to be standardized. But in the end, we are 20 minutes ahead of everybody. This is really what we have to talk about. It's like, this is all about the fact that we're talking about which metrics we're using is so humongous that, I'll take whatever metric you give me. I'll go with the flow, but that's not the point. The point is that we measure, that we benchmark hospital to hospital, and we make that transparent. That looks to go for everybody.
Sorry, I know you were waiting.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think in the end we have to do two things. We have to measure the system of the hospital because obviously that's important. But then the thing that is actually the most important is, like Laszlo was saying, is whether we take the clot out. But actually, I'll take it a step further. It's actually the 90-day outcome. I mean, who cares what happened in between? If the patient has a good outcome, that's what you want. Sometimes actually taking more time with the patient can lead to a better outcome. Now we're pushing things like, at least, where I am, we're pushing things way further. I had a 96-year-old just the other day. She had an M1 occlusion. We took out that clot, but then she had a little clot that was actually an NMN3. We took that out. She went home, she's doing great. Obviously that took a lot more time, She had to be intubated, all of these things. That took a lot more time, but again, it's the 90-day outcome that is really the most important. So I think, yes, we have to measure the system itself, but the very last thing that is important is really the outcome for the patient. I mean, that's why we're here, basically. So, yeah.
I was going to bring up, if we're collaborating with EMS on a lot of these things, that symptom onset to revascularization to clot out is important as well, because that really shows our collaboration. Are people calling EMS? How fast is EMS getting there? How fast are they getting to us? And to put that time on top of what we're doing within our own hospital system. To improve our collaboration, we should be looking at symptom onset time as well, which I do know that what the guidelines includes.
I will say, as part of the paper that needed published with NSTAR, once the call comes in, statewide, was it 11 minutes? Something outrageous. It's incredibly short. Scene to hospital time in the whole state is less than 15 minutes, which is great. And we looked at it by white, African American, Hispanic, no change, no differences. All the differences activating and calling 911. That's where there are huge disparities. But once CMS got activated, the numbers are incredible.
Let me just say something too. let me just go back a little bit because we're talking about all these neurointerventional metrics, but let's just talk about TPA for a minute. One of the things that I'll point out is that, and I saw it on the slide, is that the treatment rates are all over the place. There's somebody treating 24% and somebody treating 5%. And when you look at the N value and the underlying population, how many of the patients that you're treating actually have a stroke, and how do we measure that? Because I can tell you in our institution, we code them as a stroke, but the MRI is negative, right? So the patient had an NIH of 3 or 4, we gave them TPA, they may have had a great outcome too, and our complication rates are very low. But then you do an MRI and it's negative and you realize it was some kind of other stroke mimic or some other diagnosis, but we still code it as a stroke. They get coded as a stroke because the ED physician codes it as a stroke, the admitting doc codes it as a stroke.
They don't code out as a stroke. It depends on the documentation.
I'm just saying, forget about the ICD-10 code. Let's just rewind. The MRI is negative, but maybe that gets reported into the database as a patient's treated. It's considered a stroke. It probably goes into the database as a stroke, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But the point is that back to the whole point of what kind of data is going into the system. I think even the neurointerventional data clearly is imperfect. But just going to the TPA data, I mean, maybe at our institution, but who knows what's going on at other places. I'm just saying, 24% of your patients are getting treated with TPA. It seems like a very high number to me. And the question is, what kind of data are they putting into the system? I mean, I saw that number up there, 24%. It just seems like a very high number.
The number of mimics is not that. Do we have nationwide published yet?
The thing is that when you start treating very early, like we're doing in South Florida, it is possible to avoid a stroke. It is possible to have negative diffusions. It's not common, I agree, but it's not beyond the realm of possibilities. When we're treating at 60 and 70 and 80 minutes, then I would agree a negative MRI would be very indicative of a stroke mimic.
And I would say that our complication rates, although we may overtreat, our complication rates are very low. So what I've learned as an ER physician, the fear from an ER physician is always, you're going to give this drug, they're going to bleed, the data shows 10% bleed rates, and but the reality is that if you overtreat, as long as it's the right patient and you're eliminating all the exclusion criteria and you're doing it on the right patient, even if you're wrong, the complication rates are low. So there's really no downside. But the question is the data. We're comparing. Are we using that as a data point to determine quality of care? And if so, how's that data? What does that data really mean? Is really the point.
Just quickly going back to that system approach, I'm preparing a poster for the ISC 2019, and I looked up for cases where from the stroke onset to the clot removal time, so TK3, and it was TK3 in these cases, was less than 120 minutes. So that includes recognition of the stroke, phone call 911, EMS bringing in the patient, and we removing the blood clot within 2 hours. And we found in the 2 years I worked up 18 of these cases, and this is approximately 15% of our caseload. It's not a lot, but I think it's a great number.
Have they received TPA? Any of them received TPA?
I did not work it up on my poster. I don't know the answer to that. Some of them, yes. Some of them got TPA, yes. But at Holy Cross at least, probably a third of our patients, or maximum 50% gets TPA, but it's closer to a third.
I think everyone has raised some excellent, valid points. Ultimately, as Niels and Dr. Sacco and others mentioned, we want to have, if we were to have one singular benchmark, a proxy for quality of care, and we surveyed 100 people, what would we pick? I think based on all the available literature and the research and the data, we all can agree that time to treatment initiation, and reperfusion is one of the most important, not the most important predictor of good outcomes, along with NIH stroke scale score, age, etc. Right? But again, not from a research-centric standpoint, but from a QI, process efficiency for EMS to easily interpret, that singular variable is drawer to joint puncture. Okay? And I encourage you to discuss and disclose all the other metrics to EMS as you wish. My concern is if we add too many analyses to the dashboards, the work by the UM group, already it is fairly involved and a lot of time commitment. We want to get this data out to the hospitals, out in the community within a timely fashion. Already it takes about 90 days. So really appreciate all of your input and attending today and the discussion. Any other questions or recommendations?
I do have a question,
This is really for the stroke coordinators. I work at FMC, and I want to say in the last 4 or 5 years, 5 years ago when I started in this role, the biggest focus for me was TPA and core measures. So in the last 5 years, we've seen our stroke programs grow and patients passing through our program. And now with interventionalists stationed at hospitals, you see your stroke, number one, you see your interventions grow. So at FMC, we've had about a 3 times growth of the amount of interventions that we're treating each month. And that's because it's more selective and a little bit more aggressive in terms of what's being caught. The volumes also increase, and I'm trying to figure out from bigger hospitals, how do you start justifying, hey, a stroke coordinator with a stroke program, with a decent intervention program, you're going to be looking at least 35 to 40 measures on each patient, especially if they get interventions. At what point can you justify based on volume that you need additional help? Because I don't think it's sustainable for one stroke coordinator to keep track of all of these measures. We love the interventionalists, love what you bring to the program, but along with that comes more data, more collections. We have now another registry that we have to kind of worry about, the dashboard. We have to get with the guidelines. We have joint commissions, CMS. These measures aren't being retired, they just keep on adding. So from the bigger facilities that have that bright red volume, what are you guys doing to kind of...
But I just wanted to say that one of the reasons why we chose to get with the guidelines was because it doesn't double your work. Initially, we had envisioned doing it with an additional Excel spreadsheet. We're still, the ends of that are happening in Palm Beach. And the issue is that just doesn't work. We already are maxing, the tax cap. Get with the guidelines is a nationally accepted tool. The problem that we have is that we have an industry where we routinely copy one piece of data to another screen, discrete data to another discrete data field, manually by use of a stroke coordinator. And that is just mind-boggling, and that is what we need to focus our energy on. We need to have our organization push that there is a electronic transfer, MSTARS, safety pad, or data, pre-hospital data, hospital data, straight into these data tools so that nobody needs to spend their time copying drawing puncture times into one tool, but actually that you can focus on patient outreach, EMS education, all this other stuff. So that's really what you're trained for. And it's just really sad that we're not in a position. We're like the banking industry was in the 1960s.
So at Baptist, we have a number of stroke data analysts who enter data into Get With The Guidelines and also into our, we have a stroke alert database And so what we're doing right now to talk to hospital administration so that we can get additional resources is we looked at how much time it was actually taking to enter a case into Get With The Guidelines. How much time is it taking to enter a case into our other database? And so we added up the number of cases. We have TPA and intervention obviously taking much longer than, you know, a TIA case. And so we really just added up all of that time that it takes per case, per month, and we were able to petition for 2 additional stroke data analysts for our department. We eventually got that, so we were able to keep on top, but then now we're doing stroke data collection for additional hospitals within our system. But to combat that, the other thing that we're doing right now is working with our business intelligence team to help automate all of our data collection as much as possible from Cerner, so that we can just get a report from them monthly and then upload that into Get With The Guidelines, and then whatever residual data needs to be abstracted manually, we can do. So that's our ultimate goal for this year, is to automate hopefully 60-70% of our Get With The Guidelines data abstraction, so that we could focus on the things that are more manual and then focus more on performance improvement. So that's our goal moving forward. But the first thing I would say to do is look at how much time it takes to enter per case. You know, you have your complex cases, your simple cases, your ICHs.
I'm speaking outside of abstractions, because from a quality standpoint, I don't think that should be housed within the program. That should be something from quality. But in terms of the true objective of the stroke coordinator's role, which is really to kind of do that EMS outreach education, you know, look at your, and actually develop performance improvement models and work on it, like outside of abstraction, or do you have like an educator who's separate?
So our stroke data analysts also do all the patient education and all the follow-up phone calls for MRS, the discharge phone calls, they do all of that, and our team does all of the outreach for the community as well. So, you know, all of like our stroke fairs, and we go to schools and to churches and to nursing homes, we do all of that. But I mean, we have a team of close to 10 people that does all of the data, all of the education, all of the follow-ups, and all of the performance improvement.
And how many strokes do you?
This is for our 3 main facilities.
Okay, so it's not just
our 3 stroke centers, I should say.
And how much volume are we looking at in terms of that?
Between those 3, it's Baptist Hospital, South Miami, and West Kendall, it's close to like 1,250 strokes per year.
And 10 people.
10 people, yeah.
A memorial, do you guys have a model like that?
Yeah, we have about 1,500 strokes at one hospital and around 1,300 at the other. So we don't have a strong, you know, team of community outreach liaisons. It's essentially our stroke coordinators and the neurointerventionalists. That's it. And we engage with EMS on a quarterly basis and do some of the other community outreach, you know, lunch and learn and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely not a concerted effort. The hospital, we've requested it, but have yet to see any resources for the outreach. All right, anybody else? Comments? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight, and we'll send a link to the webinar, and you can. We'll also send out all the slides from Dr. Sacco's presentation, if that's any of the draft dashboards, and we will let you know about the next meeting. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any other thoughts, questions. Thank you.
Before we break, I apologize for the overworking of RSVPs, and I think Dr. Mello will promise that we will never do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.